Watching News at Prime, let's bring you this discussion now. President Cyril Ramaphosa is leading the country's delegation at the 80th session of the UN General Assembly starting on Tuesday. Minister in the presidency, Khumbudzo Ntshavheni, has called this an opportunity for South Africa to use the platform to reinforce its commitment to global human rights, sustainable development and peaceful conflict resolution. The assembly comes as more countries, including Australia, Belgium, Britain and Canada, are scheduled to formally recognize an independent Palestinian state on Monday. Now, earlier this week, the United Nations Commission of Inquiry on the Occupied Palestinian Territory found that Israel committed 4 of 5 acts of genocide under the 1948 Convention, strengthening South Africa's genocidal intent case at the International Court of Justice. Well, let's speak some more on this now, on what we can expect at the UN General Assembly. And just in case you're wondering how much of the Gaza conflict will form part of that meeting, for this conversation, we're joined now by analyst Ayesha Kajee. Ms. Kajee, good evening to you. Thank you very much for your time. I preface this discussion with the state visit of the US President to the United Kingdom this week. And for the first time, we saw Donald Trump disagreeing in a civil manner with another head of state about an issue, particularly what is happening in Gaza. Do you think that this is perhaps the best opportunity for the very first time that an independent Palestinian state is finally going to get some traction?
I think that several countries will recognize Palestine, the state of Palestine, at the upcoming UNGA. However, I do think that others who have indicated they might do so will think again, given Mr. Netanyahu's threats against any state that dares to recognize Palestine. So I think there will be some cold feet. I also believe that President Ramaphosa will use this opportunity to reaffirm South Africa's commitment to global solutions and South Africa's commitment to an international human rights-based foreign policy. And, within that framework, South Africa's case at the ICJ. So as you said earlier, the United Nations Commission of Inquiry just this week affirmed that in its opinion, and it's an expert opinion, that the state of Israel is committing 4 of the 5 recognized acts of genocide according to the 1948 Convention. That commission, of course, led by a very prestigious South African, Dr. Navi Pillay, and finding what we've all known for a long time, to be honest, because we've been seeing it on our mobile screens, on our PCs, our laptops, etc. So it's not anything new, but I think it does actually strengthen South Africa's case. I do think this is set to be a fairly acrimonious UNGA. And while we are focusing on the issue of the genocide in Gaza, we should also remember that probably part of Mr. Ramaphosa's intent, as it should be, is also to recognize and find solutions to other conflicts, particularly those on the African continent, such as those currently, displacing millions of Sudanese in Sudan, as well as the ongoing pockets of conflict in the DRC, Mozambique, and elsewhere.
Yeah. You say that this is going to be an opportunity for South Africa to strengthen its position on its genocidal intent case at the ICJ. Let's just remind the viewers, Ayesha, about the Commission of Inquiry, the UN Commission of Inquiry, that has now come out to say, indeed, Israel has committed genocide in Gaza. Let's take a listen and then we'll come back to this discussion.
Sure.
that have been defied by Israel. That is the highest authority identifying plausible reasons to say that there is a risk of genocide. What is needed now is for every state to take this seriously. It's the most serious crime, and to cooperate and collectively take much more action to end this genocide.
That's Dr. Navi Pillay there. Let me go back to what you said, Ayesha, and that is that this is likely going to be the most acrimonious of the General Assemblies we have seen. Based on what the UN Commission of Inquiry has come out to say, of course, South Africa will most certainly be expected to latch on to that and once again hype up its case on genocidal intent by Israel. What do you think that is going to do to South Africa's relationship with the United States? Further denting it, might it?
Well, it's already a pretty fragile relationship, isn't it? Particularly since the tariff moves by Mr. Trump's administration, and also since moves to, criminalize various South African residents, but also South Africans among them for freedom of speech in the United States, those living abroad there. Also, just this week, the United Nations Security Council, in the United Nations Security Council, the U.S. for the 6th time since October 7, 2 years ago, has vetoed a motion to sanction Israel in any shape, way, or form, which is really shameful for the US, quite frankly, given that United Nations expert panel has found that genocide is occurring, given the cases brought by South Africa and supported by other nations now at the ICJ, and also the case against Mr. Netanyahu and others at the International Criminal Court, given that Israeli genocide scholars, very respected genocide scholars around the world, including Israeli ones, such as Omer Bartov, who teaches at Brown University in the United States, have come out saying this is a genocide. A genocide is occurring in Gaza. The fact that the United States in the UN Security Council consistently refuses to actually sanction Israel and uses its veto power is going to do two things. It's going to shame the United States, as it already has. We saw actually chants of shame on you, when the US ambassador to the UN exited the chamber the other day. We've also seen that the anti-US rhetoric on this issue around the world is growing. We'll expect that to play out at the UNGA, but also it's going to put back on the table a very, very important issue, Toli, and that is the issue of the need to reform the United Nations Security Council so that one state cannot play the bullying role, the veto role that the US consistently has over this 2-year period, and indeed on any action against Israel in the past, because this is really the kind of hegemonic tactic that a multilateral institution does not need, particularly one as important as the United Nations Security Council. So it's going to bring back those calls for reform of the UNSC that we've seen over the last 3 decades or so, and they've become more and more urgent. I'm sure this is going to be an issue brought up at the UNGA on Tuesday.
Yeah. And how acrimonious or how divided are opinions going to be on the Russia-Ukraine conflict? Because that's another one. Russia lately has been taking multiple chances, flying either drones or their aircraft over NATO member states. That is also a cause for concern, is it not?
Certainly it is a cause for concern for NATO member states, and particularly for the United States, which, really does want, in terms of its foreign policy, to keep Russia in check, and particularly on the issue of Ukraine. So it's hypocrisy, vis-a-vis, on the one hand, Russia, Ukraine, and on the other hand, Israel, Palestine, is really being highlighted because it is in such stark contrast. The United States' attitude to the one conflict is in such stark contrast to the United States' attitude to the other. And the accusations of hypocrisy against the United States have actually deepened, have actually spread to many more countries and the civilian populations of many countries, certainly. But again, this is, I think, something that is going to be called out at the UNGA, particularly because the Russian actions of recent weeks, the drones flying over NATO airspace, etc., even military aircraft flying over NATO airspace, have become far more, shall we say, impudent. And that impudence is something the US immediately wants to counter via NATO and via its other multilateral groupings, and certainly via the United Nations, whereas it does not, even to the smallest degree, sanction Israel's impudence, Israel's impunity on the other hand. So it's really bringing the two up into a very glaring contrast.
Ayesha, let's conclude the conversation by bringing this conversation back to the continent. And it's something that you touched on much earlier. This Sudan conflict, it has been ongoing. And I think this week things were ramped up when the Rapid Support Forces, using drones, they targeted a mosque. People were praying. 80 people killed
in the
at one go.
Prayer there, absolutely.
Yeah. So when is it that Africa, the conflicts on the African continent, are going to get as much attention as the Russia-Ukraine conflict, or indeed what is happening to the people of Gaza being hit hard by Israel?
Golly, the only response I have to that, really, frankly, is that we're still living in a world where, unfortunately, Black and brown people, people of color, are ghettoized. People of color see that their lives mean less, our lives mean less to the international community, unfortunately, than the lives of white-skinned European descended people. And unfortunately, that is not something that will change so long as many of the regimes where people of color are in power will stop supporting the protagonists in these conflicts. In Sudan, for example, there have been repeated allegations with at least some evidence that the United Arab Emirates is supporting the Rapid Support Forces against the Sudanese armed forces, that Libya is also providing some support, both in the form of smuggling arms as well as in the form of sending some of its own fighters into Rapid Support Forces held territory in Darfur to work against the Sudanese armed forces. So as long as these regimes, such as Libya, such as the United Arab Emirates, continue to foment conflict in other countries where people of color, innocent civilians, are being murdered in their thousands and displaced in their millions, as they are in Sudan, in return for access to that country's gold reserves, for example. That is the allegation against the UAE, at least. And until that greed is not stopped, until we do not call out that greed, that mercenary ambition of some countries to exploit conflicts for their own benefit, we're not going to see, unfortunately, peace on our continent, because we have a continent, we live on a continent that has been blessed with very many resources. But that blessing, as we've seen over several hundreds of years, has also proved a curse for the inhabitants of our continent, because they are not the ones that benefit from those resources. It's the same whether it's gold in Sudan, coltan in the DRC, oil in South Sudan, or whatever. Unfortunately, African people are not benefiting from Africa's resources.
International relations expert Ayesha Kajee, thank you very much for your time and indeed not mincing her words, particularly on that last point.